Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast. We've got Ray Fittipaldo. Now that rookie camp is in the books, I want to talk about Will Howard. But before we do that, we got to talk about what Omar Khan said during rookie camp because he addressed the George Pickens trade. I want to get Ray's thoughts on that. We'll talk about Will Howard and what we look at the quarterback situation going into OTAs in a few weeks. And we'll talk about some of the other moves the Steelers have made since rookie camp, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive Podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in an accident or you need help with workers' compensation representation, you need to call Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about Omar Khan for a bit. And I know people want to get into rookie camp. We were there. We had our first reaction video up with you and Brian talking from the facility. But Omar Khan addressed us shortly after you guys made that video. And it was very interesting to me because when he did what he said, he kind of dipped into several different things. But he said he wanted to talk to us after the George Pickens trade, and he said a few different things. You know, he was talking about like, hey, it felt like a clean slate for both. A clean slate for both sides. You know, it worked out for everybody involved, including the Cowboys and this, that, and the third. But the one thing that I thought was really interesting that he got into was that when he was asked about how it impacts the team this year, he said, quote, "We wouldn't have done this if we didn't feel good about the receiver situation, about our depth here. I know people make the comparison about last year, but it's not even close to being the same." And then someone asked, what's the difference? He said, we have DK Metcalf. He thinks that the addition of Robert Woods is going to make a difference. He talked about Roman Wilson being healthy and them expecting him to take a leap, guys being more experienced. Ray, is Omar Khan feeding us a little bit of nonsense? Or do you think he's really talking the truth? And because to me, this screams a lot like we believe in Kenny Pickett. And meanwhile, they're trying to make some moves in the background.
I think the one big difference is you do have DK Metcalf instead of George Pickens. I think it's a lot easier to build your offense around a guy who you know is a professional and you know who's going to run his routes the proper way. It's much easier on the coaches and on the players, I think, when you have a true pro like Metcalf. Now, in terms of the depth and the other things, listen, Omar can say all he wants about Roman Wilson, but the facts of the matter are we don't know anything about Roman Wilson, and what the Steelers know is very limited. I mean, he basically practiced for 2 or 3 days at the opening of training camp last July, got injured, came back for just a short period, a couple weeks, Chris. They played him in one game, and then he was shut down again with another injury, and he spent the entire season on IR. So I get it. They like him, but they don't even know what he's all about. And to me, Chris, is Robert Woods really any different from Van Jefferson or Allen Robinson? You know, these one-year solutions where you bring them in for depth and maybe they can block in the running game better than some of your other guys. I mean, that's kind of where we are right now. And I think after Aaron Rodgers signs, or if and when that happens, I totally expect them to be in the market for one of the receivers, the free agent receivers who are still on the market.
That's where I'm at. I think that I don't think that they're going to try to make a big trade to get somebody unless it's like a 7th round pick or something like that. I don't envision them being too aggressive in there. But there's got Keenan Allen, Gabe Davis, Amari Cooper, all guys readily available and different styles of wide receivers. I think that's the other cool part of this is that you have Gabe Davis as the big play, go down and get the ball, deep threat guy. You know, and yes, they have that in DK Metcalf. But hey, if you want to double up on that. If you want the shifty route running guy, Keenan Allen does that. Amari Cooper does that. Like they have options here to get different styles of wide receivers to pair with DK Metcalf's for and again, just for this year. This is a rental situation because you're hoping that either Calvin Austin or Roman Wilson emerge this year and become more serious threats in your offense with, whatever happens at quarterback. And if it doesn't, you could probably address it with a pick in next year's draft or next year in free agency, because the Steelers do have money to play with right now. Like if we're being honest about the Steelers salary cap situation, we can talk about the Instagram post that was or wasn't made by George Pickens and him supposedly calling the Steelers cheap, but he said it wasn't me, whatever that was. The Steelers spend their cap space. Like that ain't the issue when it comes to Steelers and spending. And right now, as it sits for this season, they have $34.2 million in cap space. I have a hard time thinking the Steelers aren't going to use a good chunk of that to address one quarterback, with signing Aaron Rodgers, who we expect to sign at some point soon. But then two, finding another wide receiver. And they don't have to be, it's not super expensive to get some of these guys. They're still in free agency for a reason. You can get one of these guys, put them on a 1-year deal, and then put yourself in a position where you're like, hey, this is who we're rocking out with this year. And then in 2026, right now they have $113 million in cap space. Then that's probably you're going to get a huge chunk of that eaten away when you sign TJ Watt to his big deal, which I think will come, in the coming months here before the season begins. And there'll probably be other signings, but point being, they have, even with that, like let's say TJ Watt is $41 million a year, which I think will be around the range that is. That's still what, $70+ million in cap space next season. And again, if the plan is to draft a rookie quarterback, you're not paying a rookie quarterback, $30 million a year. You're paying them a rookie contract. So they Omar Khan has put them in a space where they have kept a lot of their core players that they truly believe in being the future moving forward, while giving them the flexibility to take swings at different positions and say, hey, does this guy work this time? If it doesn't, we're not stuck to it. And we're not, in a position where that money that we've committed to this guy is going to hurt us for the next 3-4 years.
Yeah. And for this year, at least, Chris, they really didn't really delve too much into free agency. They wanted to accumulate those comp picks for what you said, getting a quarterback. They're obviously going to do what they've always done. They've always been a draft and develop type of a team. So, it's TJ Watt. That's the big contract this season, but you're going to have other guys coming down the road where you're going to have to spend money on them. So, I think Omar realizes that, eventually, whether it's done organically or, you just have to rip the Band-Aid off, at some point, there is going to have to be somewhat of a rebuild. And whether that meshes up with the rookie quarterback arriving in 2026 or whether that happens, a year later, we don't really know when, but there are going to be a lot of older guys moving off of this roster, and they're going to want to build around this young offensive core. So it's a very delicate process, right? I mean, I always go back to the Steelers are in the Super Bowl in 2010. You have those couple of down years. You have this great offensive core, Chris, but they were never really able to build that defense back up to being an elite unit that they could really make, a Super Bowl run with those teams. So it's all about cycles and, who you're paying, offense or defense. And they really haven't hit it right since that 2010 era. And they got to get back to that. They got to figure out a way to do that. And I think that's what, accumulating these comp picks and trying to build for the future while still saying we're going to win. That's very true. But they're also looking towards the future as well.
I think that's the bottom line. They're keeping their eyes on the future. They're not selling out on the right now for kind of half-baked answers to try to figure things out. I think that is where Omar Khan is when talking about this. And again, talking about George Pickens, it's clear George Pickens they didn't want him to be part of the long term because of all the issues that we've discussed on this show for months and for years, even, him not being able to show up on time for things, him not committing to the plan, him not running his routes as hard as he could. They want someone who can set that tone as a leader in the offensive side of the ball. And I think that's the biggest thing. On top of talent on the offensive side, they needed leaders. They needed guys that can be like, hey, get behind me. The kind of guys like Cam Hayward when Franco Harris passed away and you saw Cam Hayward carrying the 32 flag onto the field and everyone's running behind him. They need guys like that again. And not again. They have guys like that, but they need guys like that again on the offensive side of the ball. And they brought him in the past. Marquise Pouncey was that guy. David DeCastro was a less vocal version of that guy. They've had those leaders, but now they need to find them. They're hoping DK Metcalf, Pat Frymouth can be part of that. I think they're also hoping some of these offensive linemen can turn into that. Yeah. But I think that, before anything else, they need to keep investing in guys that can help build them in that direction. We're going to talk about particularly the quarterback. Everyone's looking at the quarterback next year. Let's look at the quarterback they drafted this year, because Ray, you did a special on him that ran in our Sunday paper here on that. We're talking about Will Howard out of Ohio State. We'll talk about that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, we'll remind you the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They also work on workers' compensation. If you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment's over? And who decides when your benefits are over? It's always the same answer. It's the insurance company's doctors. They won't be on your side. You need someone on your side who will fight for you. And that answer is Edgar Snyder and Associates. You can call them at 1-800-94-EDGAR because they'll always fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Call Edgar Snyder and Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about Will Howard and your piece on him. Will Howard didn't throw in rookie camp. That's not what they do. They get kind of just go through the basics and get the play calls in. But you got a chance to talk to Will Howard, and we've had a chance to talk to him a couple times, whether it be the combine or draft night on the day 3 of the draft, and then and now again at rookie camp. What's been your readout as far as what he's bringing to the table as a quarterback for the Steelers and being a rookie 6th-round pick?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Chris. I mean, what they did in rookie mini camp, at least what we were exposed to, the portions of practice we got to watch, was really pretty much a walkthrough. They're just going and, he's figuring out where he wants to go with the ball, with his progressions. But I was really impressed with his command of the huddle. The way he presented himself to us in his interview afterwards. I think that's all very important for a quarterback. There might be some of our listeners out there saying, what, command of a huddle? But he's just got a presence about him. And I'm not sitting here telling you that's going to translate into him being a tremendous starting quarterback for the Steelers one day, but I'm just very impressed with the way that he goes about his business. So listen, we're going to have more exposure to him in OTAs and minicamp. Listen, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign, Chris, he doesn't participate in minicamp, there's going to be plenty of reps for Will Howard to go out there and, show what he can do. So we're going to learn more about this guy in the coming weeks and months. But my first impression of him was really, really good. I think he's going to be a good leader for this football team. And I think we talked about this in the past. I think, listen, if the ceiling for him is like he's another Mason Rudolph, that's really, really good because he's going to be another solid locker room guy that you can count on. And you need those guys in your football team too. And I'm not going to sell this guy short. I want to see what he can do in OTAs and minicamp. I want to see him go out there in training camp, the preseason games. Maybe he'll surprise us all. I'm looking forward to that.
I think that's the thing here is people want to be surprised. Everyone is impatient about the quarterback position in Pittsburgh. Everyone wants to find the next Ben Roethlisberger, Terry Bradshaw, franchise, whoever it is. They want to get back to seeing the Steelers quarterback being a productive player. And I think where Will Howard brings is that other guys have. He has that hope that hey, he's tall. He has an arm on him. He's athletic. He's won big games at the college level. Can he win? He checks those boxes. And I get why people are excited because you haven't had that. Kenny Pickett won big games at the college level, but he wasn't this size. He wasn't this fast, and his arm wasn't this strong. And so people are like, yeah, that's better than that. Mitch Trubisky was brought in. He was kind of, by the time he was the third hand option, the Steelers had brought in. Mason Rudolph has been a career backup. You've had to deal with Devlin Hodges. Russell Wilson, he's on the back end of his career. Justin Fields might be the closest thing of hope. And it's funny, both of those guys are Ohio State quarterback, but Justin Fields might be the closest thing of hope that Steelers fans have seen to seeing maybe he could be the next guy that's been on the roster since Kenny Pickett was drafted and people believed in him. So Will Howard being the next iteration of that, I think everyone's kind of understands Aaron Rodgers if he signs, is a 1-year deal, 2 years at best if he wants to come back after that. Mason Rudolph is on a 2-year deal. Everyone kind of knows what he is. He's a guy that's going to be either a bridge or a backup. But Will Howard, there is that glimmer of hope, that gleam that you see, like, hey, if things just really work out for him, he could be that guy. And I also got to say, the way he carries himself is a big positive. He seems refreshing. He doesn't seem like he's full of himself. He fully understands, what he's done in his career, and he makes himself likable. And I think the other factor that plays into this is that when you read Ray's story and you read about Will Howard, you want to root for the guy. And I think that's something else that people want to have for their quarterback. When you look at the Steelers, you want to see, like, hey, not only do I want that guy to win, I want this guy to win for the team. I want him to win for himself. And I think that's another thing that Will Howard has going for him.
Yeah, talk about him being impressive too. I think there's a certain dose of like humility with him. If people didn't read my story, I'll just give you a little bit of background on him. But he did not receive scholarship offers from Pitt or Penn State. He was a 3-star recruit. I mean, the story about him ending up at Kansas State, he just happened to develop a relationship with their quarterbacks coach, and that's how he wound up in the Midwest, in the Big 12, just because of that one relationship. The vast majority of his offers were like Harvard, Yale, Mid-American Conference schools. I think he had Minnesota, Rutgers, Maryland offer him as well, but he was not like this big-time, quarterback prospect. ESPN had him as the 26th ranked quarterback, dual-threat quarterback in their final 2020 recruiting ranking. So, and then he goes to Kansas State, and he's like, they're constantly trying to replace him. He plays as a true freshman and leads the team, but they recruit over him. He goes to the bench, and he just dealt with that throughout his career. So just very impressive that he's been able to bounce back through that adversity. I think coming into the pros, I think that's really going to serve him well, especially being a 6th-round pick who's got to work his way up. Nothing's going to be handed to him. So when you heard him talking in his clips about Pittsburgh being the perfect place for him, this blue-collar work ethic, I mean, this guy's coming in here unpretentious. He's going to put his nose to the grindstone. And, like you said, Chris, it's easy to root for a guy like that.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that's refreshing for Steelers fans. And again, like you watch, like, I think the other thing is that when you watch, the college football playoffs, and I think that's where all the eyes are tuned in. It's tough to watch things all throughout the year and judge things. And listen, as a person who does watch those things, I've covered college football for the last 5 years of my career. I've also, I watch college football to get a sense, because I know I'm going to be doing NFL draft work. But when you look at Will Howard's tape leading into the college football playoffs, it wasn't that great. Like it was kind of like, okay, I guess like he's going to be around maybe. But then when he lit it up in those 4 games, that's what really put him on the map for a lot of people. And I think that there is, a lot of fans that see that and think, hey, that can translate right to the NFL right away. But, I always encourage people, like, it's different levels at the NFL. Like I did my film study on Will Howard. The thing that I saw was a lot of things that I saw similarly out of Mason Rudolph when he stood at the line of scrimmage and he said, okay, they're in cover 2, and they were in cover 2. He could read, make the right throw, make the right play, and oftentimes it would lead to success. But if a team just switched it up just a little bit, he would struggle, and the mental processes wouldn't be there, and he wouldn't have the things that could overcome it more often than not. Now, it also helps to be on one of the best football teams in college football when you have one of the best offensive lines, maybe the best 1-2 punch at running back that you had in college football last year, maybe the best 1-2 punch at wide receiver that you had last year. So, like, I think that's why when people say, so wait a minute, if he's all this, if he's tall, if he's fast, if he's got a cannon arm, and if he won the national championship, why wasn't he higher pick? I think it's because everyone looked around that offense. They said, if you probably were to rank the top players in that offense, Will Howard would probably I think he does fall outside the top 5. It's not even a question. He's outside of the top 5 most important players to Ohio State's offense last year. When you consider Josh Simmons is a 1st-round pick at offensive tackle, both Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins went in the earlier rounds, and Emeka Egbuka went early, and Jeremiah Smith is probably going to be the first receiver off the board next year's draft.
Yeah, one thing I do want to mention about that is I was talking to Downingtown West head coach Tom Klein, and he was the offensive line coach, did a lot of the offensive coordinating when Will was there. And he's heard all that criticism about Will Howard being successful because of the pieces around him. And his comeback was, well, what do you think he's going to have in the pros? He's not going to have a bunch of, Jimmys and Joes surrounding him in the pros. You can make the argument that, Ohio State's weapons are going to be better than the Steelers, but really, Chris, like by how much? I think, when you break it down, there's a reason guys are in the NFL, and there's a reason, some guys don't never make it to the NFL. So that was his comeback. And I do think we have to keep that in the back of our minds as well. Any team that Will Howard was going to go to, he's going to have weapons around him. But I think people kind of drew that conclusion from Ohio State that those guys made him more than the other way around. Well, let's see how that plays out in the future. Let's at least give Will Howard a chance to prove that he can play in the NFL.
And that's what he'll get when he gets to training camp, gets to work out, and we'll get to see him, work in Latrobe. But hey, remember, OTAs come before that. Who will the Steelers have in OTAs? We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, but remind you, the show is also brought to you by UFC Gym. Looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind? Step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training. It's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by third-degree black belts that build confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today. That's UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about some of the other things the Steelers have been doing. They signed running back Trey Sermon to a 1-year deal, adding to a running back to that room. So now you have Kaleb Johnson, you have Jaylen Warren, you have Kenneth Gainwell, and then Trey Sermon adds another person there for training camp here. What do you think that does, if anything, for training camp and OTAs, just for the Steelers to have variety in their backfield?
Yeah, listen, Trey Sermon has been around. He actually played in all 17 games last season for the Colts. He had 3 starts. Now, didn't put up a lot of numbers. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor is the guy there. But, he got some playing time when Taylor was injured this year. And it's just another guy to throw into the mix. Listen, Jonathan Ward was up and down last season from the practice squad to the active roster. Jonathan Ward, is one of his best qualities is bring him up for special teams purposes, and that guy's going to help you on teams. Now, I don't know if Sermon is a guy who's going to help out on teams. We'll find that out probably in a couple of weeks when they get to OTAs. But in the end, Chris, I think if he's another guy who goes up and down between the practice squad, that's great. With practice squads being expanded to 16 guys, you can have guys like that on your roster. Or I know there's been speculation on talk radio early this week and over the weekend that maybe this means Cordero Patterson doesn't make the team. Now, that remains to be seen. I think if they did want to move on from Patterson, they probably would have done that in March. He's an Arthur Smith guy. I think Arthur Smith brought him and those other guys in for a reason. So I'm not saying that he's definitely going to be on the team, but listen, if Sermon really, impresses, then maybe he could knock a guy like Cordero Patterson off the 53 come September.
Absolutely. I think that's part of the situation here is the Steelers are diversifying their options out of the backfield because, again, like if the hope is for the Steelers offensive line to be much better this year, for them to coalesce Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, Isaac Seumalo, if that group's going to be a leading factor, they're going to need multiple threats out of the backfield because it's not going to be about loading up on one guy, especially Jaylen Warren, Kaleb Johnson. I think that sounds like a really good 1-2 punch for the different styles that they have, but you're still going to want to find that extra gear that you might need out of the backfield. And also, kick returners are important. If Kenneth Gainwell might be in that conversation, maybe you want to protect him for that and make him a third down back, but you want another, big body back. But I think, again, this gives you multiple options when you head to training camp because you never know who gets hurt. Who you need to kind of keep around, for the start of the season. You never know who ends up working out better than some others for the system that you're trying to run. I think that's the bottom line here. Is the Steelers are trying to expand themselves a little bit, and they're adding to their roster, also adding to their 90-man roster for the rest of the offseason. They added offensive lineman Gareth Warren, 6'5", 328-pound offensive lineman from Hawaii. He was a tryout player, did make the team. Again, just a really big man. When we were there, I was just like, oh my God, that guy is huge. But he's another person that they're adding there. So like they're adding their pieces, they're putting things together, they're trying to get things ready for the, for OTAs so that they can have their guys to work out. But bottom line is, I think, especially on the offensive side of the ball, they're trying to diversify their talents as much as possible so that when they're putting things together, they have multiple options and outlets to become the type of team that I think that they want to be, which, to be clear, they still want to be a physical upfront team. They want to be the team that runs the ball well, plays off of it well, and sets the tone physically. And I think that's where it's going to be, is can they continue to be that team and still make other investments elsewhere? Because, if we're talking again about the next big signings, it could be Aaron Rodgers at quarterback and a wide receiver. Neither of those address that tone of it, but it's about setting that balance that I think that they really want to see.
Yeah, the interesting part about this offseason, Chris, is, the big domino is obviously Aaron Rodgers and, maybe a receiver for him. But it is nice that they don't have to go out and fill other positions on their roster going into the summer like they did last season. If you remember last season, I think they signed, was it Marcus Golden last year or 2 years ago? Yeah. They were looking to add him like in the middle of minicamp or OTAs. Mm-hmm. And, that didn't get done until late. And obviously, the receiver stuff was an ongoing story throughout the spring and summer last year. Are you going to trade for Ayuk? And that, of course, never came to pass too. So other than the quarterback situation, if you look around this roster, the addition of Jack Sawyer gives you 4 really good outside linebackers. You dump a lot of resources into the defensive line. You've done the same with free agency resources in the secondary. So like a lot of these positions are filled going into spring practices in the summer. And I think, that's a good thing for Omar and the coaching staff. Quarterback has to be decided upon, and that's obviously the big story, but you don't have any other gaping holes on your roster going into training camp.
No, I think that's the thing, is just making sure that you're as balanced as possible across the board, not having those gaping weaknesses. But again, it leads back to our opening topic, why I think wide receiver, there should be a move coming. Might not be a big one, might not be, might not be like a blockbuster, but at least another body that comes in, because I don't care what Omar Khan says, Robert Woods is this year's Allen Robinson or Van Jefferson. Right. They need another guy that can be a decent threat across from George Pickens. And again, that doesn't count out Roman Wilson. He might work out, but like you said, they still haven't even seen this guy play yet. They need it's it's kind of like the same thing with Calvin Austin 2 years ago when he missed his rookie season. So they got a lot of other moves to be made here. We'll keep you up to date with those here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, thanks so much for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're back Wednesday with more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.